When experienced trail rider Mike Bennett stumbled upon a collapsed Mustang in the remote wilderness of Nevada, he never imagined the extraordinary journey of survival and healing that was about to unfold. This is the incredible true story of how one man's compassion gave a wild horse a second chance at life. The morning sun had barely crept over the rugged Nevada mountains when Mike Bennett saddled up for what he thought would be a routine trail ride. 20 years of experience exploring these remote paths hadn't prepared him for what he was about to discover. As his own horse rounded a narrow bend along the rocky terrain, Mike noticed something unusual in the distance, a dark shape, motionless, against the dusty ground. Drawing closer, his heart sank. There, collapsed on its side, lay a magnificent Mustang stallion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now back to the story. The horse's coat, once surely gleaming, was now caked with dirt and scratches. Its breathing was shallow, sides heaving with each labored breath. Ribs protruded sharply through its hide, telling a story of days, perhaps weeks, without proper nourishment. Mike dismounted carefully, his experienced eyes scanning the area for signs of what might have happened. The ground around the fallen horse told a grim tale. Scuff marks and disturbed earth suggested the Mustang had been down for at least a day, maybe longer. Its legs showed signs of having tried repeatedly to stand, only to fail each time. As he approached the struggling animal, Mike expected the typical wild horse response: fear, aggression, or an attempt to flee. Instead, the Mustang's eyes, though glazed with exhaustion, met his with an almost human-like plea for help. This proud creature, a symbol of American wilderness and freedom, had reached the end of its strength. "Easy there, boy," Mike murmured, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he assessed the situation. The horse was severely dehydrated, its gums pale and tacky. Without immediate intervention, Mike knew the Mustang's chances of survival were slim. But out here, miles from the nearest road, options were limited. Using the satellite phone he always carried for emergencies, Mike made several urgent calls. First to the local Bureau of Land Management office, then to an emergency veterinary service. The response was unanimous. If the horse couldn't be helped to its feet soon, its muscles would continue to deteriorate, leading to a point of no return. As the morning wore on, Mike stayed with the fallen Mustang. He shared water from his own supplies, carefully dribbling small amounts into the horse's mouth. The stallion accepted this help with surprising trust, as if understanding that this human represented its last chance at survival. Hours passed under the intensifying desert sun. Mike fashioned a makeshift shelter, using his emergency blanket to protect the horse from the worst of the heat. He talked continuously to the Mustang, his voice seeming to provide comfort to the exhausted animal. Through it all, those intelligent eyes remained fixed on him, holding a mix of fear and hope that made Mike's heart ache. The sound of an approaching helicopter finally broke the afternoon silence. The emergency veterinary team had managed to mobilize a rescue operation. As the aircraft landed nearby, kicking up clouds of dust, Mike saw the Mustang's muscles tense. He continued speaking softly, his presence now a familiar anchor in what must have been a terrifying situation for the wild horse. What happened next would test both man and horse to their limits. The rescue that was about to unfold would not only challenge everything Mike knew about horse handling, but would also forge an unexpected bond between a wild spirit and the human who refused to give up on it. As the veterinary team approached, with their equipment, no one could have predicted the extraordinary series of events that were about to unfold in this remote corner of the Nevada wilderness. Dr. Sarah Martinez jumped from the helicopter with practiced efficiency, her medical kit clutched tightly against her chest. 20 years of emergency veterinary medicine had taught her that the first few minutes of assessment could mean the difference between life and death. The fallen Mustang's condition made her breath catch. This was going to be one of her most challenging cases yet. "How long has he been down?" she shouted over the whirring helicopter blades to Mike, who hadn't left the horse's side. "Based on the ground signs, at least 24 hours, Mike replied, his voice tight with concern. "Maybe longer." Sarah's experienced hands moved quickly over the Mustang's body, checking vital signs and looking for injuries. The horse's temperature was dangerously high, muscles severely compromised from prolonged pressure. Most concerning was the lack of response in his hind legs, a sign that nerve damage might have already set in. "We have a complex situation. Here," Sarah announced to her team as they surrounded the horse with their equipment. "This boy's been down too long. His muscles are showing signs of capture myopathy, and there's potential nerve damage. If we can't get him up soon, we'll lose him." The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of medical intervention. Sarah inserted an IV line, beginning crucial fluid therapy, while her team worked to position specialized lifting equipment. Around the horse's body, the Mustang, despite his wild nature, remained surprisingly calm throughout the procedure, his eyes still fixed on Mike, who continued to speak softly to him. "We're going to try something risky," Sarah explained to Mike. "We need to get him vertical, but we can't use a traditional sling. His muscles are too compromised. We're going to have to use the Anderson sling system. It's our only shot at preventing further injury." The Anderson sling was a complex piece of equipment, rarely used in field situations due to its complexity. But it was also their best chance at supporting the horse's entire body weight while protecting his damaged muscles. As the team worked to position the straps and supports, the Mustang's breathing became more labored, his eyes showing the first signs of panic. Mike positioned himself near the horse's head, becoming an anchor of calm in the chaotic scene. "You're doing great, boy," he murmured, his hand gently stroking the Mustang's neck. "Just a little longer." The helicopter pilot adjusted his position, aligning the aircraft perfectly with the lifting apparatus. The sound of the rotors changed pitch as the cable began to take tension. This was the moment of truth. If the horse panicked now, all their efforts would be for nothing. "Easy, easy." Now Sarah coached as the sling began to lift. The Mustang's eyes widened, but remarkably he didn't struggle. Inch by inch his massive body rose from the ground, supported by the carefully designed network of straps and cushions. But halfway up, disaster struck. The horse's back left leg, perhaps finally receiving blood flow after hours of compression, began to spasm violently. The entire sling system swayed dangerously, threatening to topple. "Hold!" Sarah shouted into her radio, and the lift paused. The next few seconds would determine everything. If the Mustang gave in to panic now, at this precarious angle, the consequences could be fatal. It was Mike who moved first, stepping forward despite the danger. His voice cut through the tension, steady and calm. "Look at me, boy, right here. You're okay." The horse's eyes locked onto him, and miraculously the spasming began to subside. Sarah watched in amazement as the wild Mustang, through what must have been excruciating pain, seemed to understand the need to remain still. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. She was witnessing something extraordinary, a connection between human and horse that defied explanation. With the crisis averted, the team completed the lift. The Mustang now hung suspended, his weight properly distributed, his vital signs stabilizing. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, a delicate helicopter transport to the nearest emergency veterinary facility, followed by what would likely be months of rehabilitation. As Sarah prepared the horse for transport, she caught Mike's eye. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "A wild horse accepting help like this. It's unprecedented." Mike nodded, his eyes never leaving the Mustang. "There's something special about this one," he replied softly. "Something different." Neither of them could have known then just how right they were, or how this dramatic rescue would be only the first chapter in an even more remarkable story of survival, trust, and healing that was about to unfold. The helicopter journey was a delicate balance between speed and stability. Through the open door, Dr. Martinez monitored the suspended Mustang's vital signs while communicating constantly with the pilot. Every air pocket, every slight turbulence sent ripples of tension through the medical team. The horse hung in the Anderson sling beneath them, his dark coat gleaming with sweat despite the cool air at altitude. Mike followed in a BLM emergency vehicle below, his eyes rarely leaving the distinctive shape of the helicopter against the vast Nevada sky. The 2-hour journey to the large animal emergency center in Reno felt like an eternity. He couldn't shake the image of those intelligent eyes looking into his, couldn't forget the trust the wild horse had placed in him. At the facility, a team of specialists waited on standby. The helicopter descended with excruciating precision, lowering the Mustang onto a specially prepared pad. The horse's legs trembled as they made contact with the ground, but he remained upright in the sling, a promising sign that would soon prove deceptive. Dr. James Chen, the facility's chief veterinarian, began his assessment immediately. "We need full blood work, radiographs and ultrasound," he ordered, his experienced hands moving across the horse's muscles. "And get me a creatine kinase level stat. I want to know exactly how much muscle damage we're dealing with." The initial results painted a grim picture. The Mustang's blood work revealed severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and alarming levels of muscle proteins in his bloodstream, signs that his body was breaking down its own tissue. The creatine kinase levels were off the charts, indicating massive muscle damage. Normal CK levels in horses range from 100 to 300 units per liter, Dr. Chen explained to Mike, who had arrived and refused to leave. "This boy's levels are over 100,000. His kidneys are at risk of shutting down from processing all the damaged muscle tissue." The next few hours became a race against time. The medical team worked tirelessly, administering fluids, medications, and plasma transfusions. The Mustang's condition was classified as critical, with multiple organ systems threatening to fail. Yet throughout it all, the horse displayed a fighting spirit that amazed even the most experienced staff members. "Most wild horses would be unmanageable in this situation," Dr. Martinez noted, watching as the stallion allowed yet another IV line to be placed. "But he seems to understand we're trying to help." Mike had positioned himself where the Mustang could see him, maintaining the connection that had begun in the desert. The horse's eyes, though dulled by pain and medication, still sought him out regularly, as if drawing strength from his presence. As night fell, the medical team faced a new crisis. The Mustang's temperature began to spike, and his breathing became increasingly labored. The muscle damage was triggering a cascade of inflammatory responses throughout his body. Dr. Chen ordered ice packs and cooling blankets, but the horse's condition continued to deteriorate. "We're looking at a serious systemic inflammatory response," Dr. Chen explained grimly. "His body is essentially attacking itself. The next 12 hours will be critical." Mike watched as the medical team worked through the night, their movements becoming increasingly urgent. The monitors beeped incessantly, each sound a reminder of how precarious the situation remained. The strong, proud stallion he had found in the desert now looked vulnerable under the harsh medical lights, his life hanging by a thread. Around midnight, Dr. Martinez noticed something concerning in the horse's blood work. "His kidney values are climbing," she announced, her voice tense. "We need to adjust the fluid therapy immediately." The team sprang into action, but as they Approached with new medication, the Mustang finally showed his first signs of serious distress. His eyes rolled back, his massive body trembling as he tried to pull away from the medical equipment despite his weakness. It was Mike who stepped in, moving closer despite the staff's warnings. "Remember me, boy," he said softly, his voice carrying across the tense silence of the treatment area. "We've come too far to give up now." The Mustang's ears flicked toward his voice, and gradually the panic in his eyes subsided. Dr. Chen seized the moment to administer the crucial medication, but his expression remained grave. They had survived this crisis, but the night was far from over. As the medical team continued their work, Mike settled into a chair near the horse's stall, preparing for a long vigil. He didn't know why he felt so connected to this wild creature, or why the horse seemed to trust him so completely, but he did know that somewhere between the desert rescue and this sterile medical facility, their fates had become inexplicably intertwined. The night stretched ahead, filled with uncertainty, as everyone waited to see if this remarkable Mustang's will to live would be enough to carry him through until dawn. The hours before dawn proved to be the most challenging. The Mustang's temperature continued to fluctuate dangerously, spiking to alarming levels despite the cooling measures. Dr. Chen ordered more aggressive treatments, including specialized medications that had only recently been developed for critical equine cases. As the medical team worked, they began to notice unusual markings on the horse's body that had been hidden under the dirt and sweat. Along his left flank, partially obscured by his coat, was a pattern of scarring that suggested this wasn't the first time the stallion had faced adversity. "These are old injury marks," Dr. Martinez observed, her fingers gently tracing the scars. "Some look like they're from a mountain lion attack, probably from when he was younger. This boy's a survivor." The discovery sparked a deeper investigation into the Mustang's history. Dr. Chen called in Carol White, a BLM wild horse specialist who had been documenting the local herds for over 2 decades. She arrived at the facility just before sunrise, armed with years of photographs and records. "I think I know who this is," Carol announced, after examining the horse's distinctive markings and scars. "We've been tracking him for years. The local ranchers call him Ghost because of his ability to appear and disappear in the high country. He's one of the oldest known wild stallions in the region." Mike listened intently as Carol shared what they knew about Ghost's history. The stallion had been photographed numerous times over the years, always leading a small band of mares through some of the most challenging terrain in Nevada. He was estimated to be around 15 years old, remarkably mature for a wild stallion who had survived mountain lion attacks, harsh winters, and countless battles with rival horses. "What's most extraordinary," Carol continued, "is his reputation for intelligence. We've documented him leading his herd to hidden water sources during droughts, finding paths through dangerous territory that other horses wouldn't attempt. He's not just survived, he's thrived in conditions that would have defeated most horses." This information seemed to energize the medical team. They weren't just fighting to save any horse, they were trying to save a living legend of the Nevada wilderness. Around 3 a.m., however, Ghost's condition took another dangerous turn. His heart rate began to climb, and his breathing became increasingly labored. "His body is overwhelmed," Dr. Chen explained grimly. "The muscle damage is triggering a cascade of inflammatory responses that we're struggling to control. We need to try something unconventional." The doctor proposed a radical treatment protocol, a combination of cutting-edge anti-inflammatory medications and traditional Chinese herbal remedies that he had been researching for cases of severe systemic inflammation. It was experimental, but at this point they were running out of options. Mike, who hadn't left the facility, watched as they administered the new treatment. Ghost's eyes, though glazed with fever, still tracked his movements. The connection between them remained palpable, defying explanation. As the new medications began to circulate through Ghost's system, the monitoring equipment showed the first positive changes they'd seen in hours. His heart rate began to stabilize, and his breathing became less labored. By sunrise, his fever had finally broken. "He's responding," Dr. Martinez announced, the relief evident in her voice. "His inflammatory markers are starting to decrease. Whatever you did, Doctor, Chen, it's working." The morning light filtering through the facility's windows revealed a changed horse. Ghost was still critically ill, but there was a new strength in his gaze, a determination that matched everything they had learned about his remarkable history. The old scars that marked his body now seemed less like damages and more like badges of honor, testimony to a lifetime of overcoming impossible odds. Carol, who had stayed through the night, shook her head in amazement. "Even now, he's living up to his reputation. Most horses wouldn't have survived this long, but Ghost, he's always been different." As the medical team cautiously celebrated this first real sign of improvement, Mike moved closer to Ghost's stall, the stallion's ears pricked forward, recognizing his presence. In that moment, Mike realized that they had all become part of a larger story, one that had begun years ago in the wild places of Nevada, and was now unfolding in ways none of them could have predicted. But the battle was far from over. Ghost had survived the night, but the road to recovery, if recovery was possible, would test the limits of both modern veterinary medicine and this remarkable horse's will to live. The following days revealed both promise and new challenges. While Ghost's vital signs had stabilized, the extent of muscle and nerve damage from his prolonged collapse began to surface. Physical therapist Dr. Lisa Reynolds joined the team, bringing specialized expertise in equine rehabilitation. "His muscle atrophy is severe," she explained, while examining Ghost's legs. "The prolonged pressure and lack of circulation have left significant damage, especially in his hindquarters. Even if he recovers, there's no guarantee he'll regain full mobility." The first attempt to get Ghost standing without the support sling was a sobering experience. Despite his evident determination, his legs buckled almost immediately. The proud stallion who had once led his herd through treacherous mountain passes could barely support his own weight. Mike, who had taken temporary leave from his job to remain involved in Ghost's recovery, watched the failed attempt with a heavy heart. "Is there anything else we can try?" he asked, seeing the frustration in the horse's eyes. Dr. Reynolds introduced a revolutionary underwater treadmill system, technology typically reserved for elite sport horses. The water would help support Ghost's weight while allowing him to rebuild muscle strength gradually. However, getting a wild Mustang to trust such an alien environment presented its own challenges. Most domestic horses need extensive training. "To accept the underwater treadmill," Dr. Reynolds warned. "For a wild stallion like Ghost, it might be impossible." But Ghost continued to defy expectations. When Mike led him to the rehabilitation room, the stallion's nostrils flared at the strange equipment, his muscles tensing. Yet instead of fighting, he turned his head toward Mike, seeking reassurance. "That's it, boy," Mike encouraged softly, "one step at a time." The first session was a delicate process. As the water slowly rose around Ghost's legs, the medical team held their breath, expecting panic. Instead, the Mustang remained remarkably calm, seeming to understand that this strange situation was somehow helping him. Dr. Martinez, observing the session, shook her head in amazement. "His ability to adapt, it's extraordinary. You can almost see him processing and learning." But the road to recovery wasn't linear. After several days of progress, Ghost developed an unexpected complication, a severe infection at one of his IV sites. His temperature spiked again, and the team feared they might lose the ground they'd gained. "This is a critical setback," Dr. Chen explained. "His immune system is already compromised from the original trauma. Fighting this infection will take tremendous strength." The infection brought new challenges in medication management. Ghost needed powerful antibiotics, but these carried their own risks for his already stressed system. The team had to constantly balance aggressive treatment of the infection against the potential damage to his recovering organs. Through it all, the bond between Ghost and Mike continued to deepen. The stallion seemed to draw strength from Mike's presence during treatments, remaining calmer and more cooperative when he was nearby. The facility staff began scheduling the most challenging procedures for times when Mike could be present. Carol White, who continued to visit regularly, brought historical context to Ghost's remarkable behavior. "In all my years studying wild horses, I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "There are documented cases of Mustangs bonding with humans, but usually only after months or years of careful training. What's happening here is unique." As the second week of rehabilitation began, the team faced a difficult decision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ghost's confined recovery in the medical facility, while necessary, went against every instinct of a wild horse accustomed to roaming free. Signs of mental stress began to appear: decreased appetite, restlessness, and periods of depression. "We need to find a balance," Dr. Reynolds argued during a team meeting. "His physical recovery is crucial, but we can't ignore the psychological impact of confinement on a wild horse." The solution came from an unexpected source. The facility had a small paddock originally designed for exercise during long-term recoveries. While Ghost wasn't ready for free movement, Dr. Reynolds suggested modifying the space to create a controlled environment where he could experience fresh air and natural light while remaining supported by safety equipment. The paddock modification project became a labor of love for the facility staff. They worked after hours to install specialized support bars, non-slip flooring, and a modified sling system that would allow Ghost more natural movement while preventing falls. As Mike helped with the preparations, he caught Ghost watching intently through his stall window, ears pricked forward with interest. Those intelligent eyes seemed to understand that something important was happening. Another step on the long journey from the desert crisis that had brought them together. What no one could predict was how this small taste of freedom would affect Ghost's recovery, or the new challenges it would present in balancing his wild nature with the constraints of medical rehabilitation. Ghost's first day in the modified paddock marked a turning point in his recovery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the specially designed space as Mike and Dr. Reynolds carefully guided the stallion through the facility's doors. The moment Ghost's nostrils caught the fresh air, his head lifted, and a new energy seemed to flow through his weakened body. "Easy now," Mike cautioned, as Ghost attempted to move more quickly than his healing muscles could handle. The support system they'd installed, a complex network of safety harnesses and guide rails, prevented the stallion from putting too much strain on his recovering legs while still allowing natural movement. What happened next astonished even the most experienced members of the medical team. Instead of fighting the support equipment or showing signs of stress, Ghost began methodically testing his limitations. He would take a few careful steps, pause to rest, then try again, each time seeming to assess his own progress. "This is remarkable," Dr. Reynolds observed, taking detailed notes. "He's essentially creating his own physical therapy program. Look at how he's distributing his weight, learning what he can and can't do." The outdoor sessions began to show measurable results. Ghost's muscle tone improved steadily, and the natural sunlight seemed to accelerate his healing. Blood tests showed improving organ function, and his appetite increased significantly. Even the persistent infection from his IV site began to clear. But it was during one particularly windy afternoon that everything changed. A powerful gust carried a scent that triggered something deep in Ghost's wild instincts. His head shot up, nostrils flaring, as the distinct smell of a mountain lion drifted from the distant hills. In that instant, the careful progress of weeks hung in the balance. Mike saw the change immediately, the sudden tension in Ghost's body, the primal fear that threatened to override weeks of trust and rehabilitation. The stallion's muscles bunched, preparing for flight despite his weakness. In the wild, this instinct had kept him alive. Here, such a reaction could undo everything they'd achieved. "Ghost, stay with me," Mike called firmly, moving to position, himself in the horse's line of sight. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though Ghost's wild nature would prevail. His eyes had taken on a distant look, focused on something far beyond the paddock's boundaries. Dr. Martinez, who had been observing the session, reached for a sedative, but Mike held up his hand. "Wait," he said softly. "Give him a chance." The next few moments became a turning point that none of them would ever forget. Ghost's body trembled with the conflict between instinct and trust. His eyes darted between the distant hills and Mike's steady presence. Then, gradually, his muscles began to relax. The wild fear in his eyes faded, replaced by something that looked remarkably like conscious choice. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Martinez whispered. "He's actually overriding his flight response. Do you understand how extraordinary this is?" The incident became a catalyst for even more impressive developments. Ghost began showing increased focus during his therapy sessions, as if the challenge of controlling his instincts had awakened new levels of determination. He worked with growing confidence in the support system, and his progress accelerated notably. Dr. Reynolds modified his rehabilitation plan to include more challenging exercises. They introduced gentle slopes in the paddock, different ground, textures and obstacles that required more complex movements. Ghost tackled each new challenge with remarkable patience and intelligence. "He's not just recovering," Dr. Chen noted during a team evaluation. "He's adapting and problem-solving in ways that challenge everything we know about equine rehabilitation." The breakthrough had another unexpected effect. It deepened the already strong bond between Ghost and Mike. The trust shown during the mountain lion incident seemed to have created a new level of understanding between them. Ghost began anticipating Mike's instructions during therapy sessions, and their communication became almost intuitive. Carol White, continuing her documentation of Ghost's journey, saw larger implications in this development. "What we're witnessing, it goes beyond typical horse-human interaction," she explained. "This could change how we approach wild horse rehabilitation entirely." As the sun set on the paddock that evening, Mike spent extra time with Ghost, both of them seeming to understand the significance of what had transpired. The stallion's choice to trust over flight marked more than just a step in his physical recovery. It represented a bridge between his wild nature and his new reality. But even as they celebrated this progress, none of them could have anticipated the challenges that lay ahead, or how Ghost's remarkable journey would soon inspire changes reaching far beyond the boundaries of the rehabilitation facility. Word of Ghost's remarkable recovery began to spread beyond the walls of the rehabilitation facility. Local news outlets picked up the story, captivated by the tale of the legendary wild stallion and the unprecedented bond he had formed with Mike. As videos of Ghost's rehabilitation sessions circulated online, something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up at the facility. They came from all walks of life: horse trainers curious about his rehabilitation techniques, wildlife photographers hoping to document his progress, and families simply wanting to catch a glimpse of the famous Mustang. The facility, primarily designed for medical treatment rather than public viewing, struggled to manage the growing interest. Dr. Chen called an emergency staff meeting to address the situation. While the public interest is understandable, our priority must remain Ghost's recovery, he emphasized. The stress of too many visitors could set back his progress significantly. The solution came from an unlikely source. Jennifer Torres, a local school teacher who had brought her class to learn about Ghost, suggested developing an educational program around his recovery. We could use Ghost's story to teach people about wild horse conservation, veterinary medicine, and the importance of protecting our natural heritage, she proposed. The idea resonated with the team, particularly Carol White, who saw an opportunity to advance wild horse conservation efforts. Working with the facility staff, she helped develop a structured program that would allow limited public viewing while maintaining Ghost's peace and continuing his rehabilitation. But the increasing attention brought unexpected complications. A wealthy horse breeder, impressed by Ghost's story and remarkable qualities, approached the facility with a substantial offer. He wanted to purchase Ghost once he recovered, promising state-of-the-art facilities and the best care money could buy. The offer sparked intense debate among the team. The facility had incurred significant expenses during Ghost's treatment, and the breeder's resources could ensure his continued care. However, the proposal raised ethical questions about the fate of a wild horse that had captured the public's imagination. Mike, whose bond with Ghost had only grown stronger, found himself at the center of the controversy. Ghost isn't just any horse, he argued during a tense meeting. He represents something bigger than any of us, the spirit of the wild, the importance of freedom, the power of trust. Selling him would send the wrong message. The debate took an unexpected turn when Dr. Reynolds shared her latest assessment of Ghost's progress. While his recovery had been remarkable, the extent of his muscle and nerve damage meant he would likely never regain the full strength needed to survive in the wild. The reality of his condition added another layer of complexity to the decisions about his future. Ghost himself seemed oblivious to the discussions about his fate. His focus remained on his rehabilitation exercises, approaching each session with the same determination that had helped him survive in the wild. During one particularly challenging session, he managed to maintain his balance on uneven ground for longer than ever before, drawing applause from the watching physical therapy team. But that evening, as Mike spent time with Ghost in the paddock, he noticed something troubling. The stallion's attention kept drifting to the distant mountains, visible on the horizon. His nostrils would flare at the scent of the wind, and a restlessness had entered his movements that hadn't been there before. "He misses it, doesn't he?" Carol observed quietly, joining Mike at the paddock fence. "No matter how comfortable we make him here, part of him will always belong out there." The observation hit home. While Ghost's physical recovery had progressed remarkably, they had yet to address a fundamental question. What does freedom mean for a wild horse who can never fully return to the wild? The answer would challenge not only the rehabilitation team, but also society's broader understanding of conservation and care for wild animals. As the sun set behind the mountains, Ghost watched so intently, Mike realized they were entering a new phase of their journey together. The challenge was no longer just about physical healing. It was about finding a way to honor both Ghost's wild spirit and his new reality. Meanwhile, unknown to the team, events were unfolding in the Nevada wilderness that would soon force them to make decisions none of them were prepared for. Decisions that would test the limits of their commitment to Ghost's welfare and challenge everything they thought they knew about wild horse rehabilitation. While Ghost continued his recovery at the facility, BLM rangers made a startling discovery in the remote area where he had first been found. The remains of several wild horses scattered across a narrow canyon told a grim story. A mountain lion, unusually aggressive and desperate due to the ongoing drought, had been systematically hunting the local Mustang herds. More significantly, they found Ghost's original herd, the group of horses he had led for years. Without their experienced stallion's guidance, the band had wandered into dangerous territory. The mares and foals were showing signs of distress, struggling to find water in the increasingly harsh conditions. When Carol White brought this news to the facility, it cast Ghost's restless behavior in a new light. He wasn't just watching the mountains, she explained to Mike and the medical team. Somehow, he sensed his herd was in trouble. These horses have ways of knowing things we don't understand. The discovery added urgent complexity to the ongoing discussions about Ghost's future. Dr. Reynolds' latest evaluation had shown remarkable progress. Ghost could now walk without support for short periods, and his muscle strength was steadily improving. However, he still struggled with extended exercise and uneven terrain. "He's at a crucial point in his recovery," Dr. Reynolds explained during a team meeting. "His determination is extraordinary, but we need to be realistic about his limitations. One wrong move could undo months of progress." The situation reached a turning point during one of Ghost's therapy sessions. A young mare from his herd, separated from the others, had been brought to a nearby holding facility. When the wind carried her distant calls to the rehabilitation paddock, Ghost's reaction was immediate and profound. The stallion's entire demeanor changed. His calls answered hers, deep and resonant, carrying years of herd leadership in their tone. He moved with new purpose, pushing himself harder in his exercises than ever before. It was as if the reminder of his role as herd leader had awakened something powerful within him. Dr. Chen observed these changes with both professional interest and concern. "The psychological impact is remarkable," he noted. "His testosterone levels have spiked, and his healing rate has actually accelerated, but this intensity also carries risks." Mike spent extra time with Ghost during this period, noting how the stallion's eyes increasingly turned toward the mountains. The bond between them remained strong, but there was a new dimension to it, a sense that their journey together was heading toward an unexpected crossroads. The facility team found themselves facing an ethical dilemma that went beyond individual care. Ghost's herd needed him, but his body might never be strong enough for a full return to the wild. The mountain lion threat meant the herd's survival could depend on experienced leadership they no longer had. During one particularly challenging physical therapy session, Ghost demonstrated both his progress and his limitations. He managed to trot for the first time since his rescue, moving with a shadow of his former grace. However, the exertion left him trembling, his recovering muscles pushed to their limit. "Look at his determination," Dr. Reynolds remarked, watching Ghost struggle to catch his breath. "He's not just fighting for himself anymore. Everything he does now has a purpose beyond his own survival." The team began discussing unprecedented possibilities. While Ghost might not be able to return to his previous role, could there be a way to use his experience and intelligence to help protect the herd? The question led to innovative proposals that challenged traditional approaches to wild horse management. Carol White, drawing on her years of experience, suggested a revolutionary idea. "What if we could create a protected area?" she proposed. "A space where Ghost could have the freedom he needs while still receiving medical support, and where his herd could benefit from his leadership without him having to face the full challenges of the wild." The concept was radical, requiring cooperation between the rehabilitation facility, the BLM, and local landowners. It would mean creating something that had never been tried before, a semi-wild sanctuary that could bridge the gap between captivity and complete freedom. As these discussions continued, Ghost's behavior suggested he sensed the magnitude of the decisions being made. His sessions in the rehabilitation paddock took on new intensity, as if he were preparing himself for whatever challenge lay ahead. The sun set behind the mountains that evening, painting the sky in fierce oranges and purples. Mike stood with Ghost in the paddock, feeling the tension in the stallion's muscles, the way he seemed to be gathering his strength. Something was changing, building toward a moment that would test everyone involved in Ghost's remarkable journey. The proposal for a specialized sanctuary quickly gained momentum. Carol White leveraged her connections within the BLM to arrange a series of meetings with key stakeholders. The concept was unprecedented. A protected area that would allow Ghost to lead his herd while still receiving the medical support he needed. Sarah Martinez, a local rancher whose family had lived in the area for generations, emerged as an unexpected ally. Her property included a sheltered valley that seemed almost designed for their needs, natural boundaries, reliable water sources, and terrain that could challenge the horses without endangering them. "My grandfather used to talk about this valley," Sarah explained during a site visit. "He called it the horseshoe because of its shape. The Mustangs have always considered it a safe haven during harsh winters. It's like it's been waiting for this purpose." The valley offered everything they needed: steep enough walls to discourage mountain lion attacks, but with graduated slopes that Ghost could manage despite his limitations. Natural springs provided year-round water, and the varied vegetation matched the herd's natural diet. Most importantly, it connected to the wider range through passes that could be monitored and controlled. Dr. Chen and Dr. Reynolds spent days assessing the location from a medical perspective. They identified areas where monitoring stations could be established and planned for emergency intervention if needed. The terrain itself would provide natural physical therapy, gentle slopes for rebuilding strength, varied surfaces for improving balance, and enough space for Ghost to truly run when he was ready. But the most innovative aspect of the plan came from Mike's observations of Ghost's behavior. "He's been teaching us all along," Mike explained to the planning committee. "Watch how he approaches each new challenge in his rehabilitation. He tests, adapts, and then helps us understand what works. We need to build that same intelligence into the sanctuary's design." The team incorporated these insights into their planning. They designed observation points that would allow them to study how Ghost led his herd through the terrain. The information could revolutionize their understanding of wild horse behavior and rehabilitation. As the plans developed, Ghost's awareness of his herd's proximity became increasingly evident. The young mare at the holding facility wasn't the only one he could sense. His calls often carried across the valley, and distant answers would echo back. The herd was drawing closer, as if aware that something important was unfolding. During this time, Ghost's physical therapy took on new urgency. He pushed himself harder in each session, seeming to understand that his role was about to change. Dr. Reynolds documented remarkable improvements in his strength and coordination, though she remained concerned about his limitations. "He's exceeding our expectations," she reported during a progress review, "but we need to be realistic. He'll never be the same horse he was before the injury. The sanctuary needs to accommodate both his strengths and his vulnerabilities." The project faced its first major challenge when news of the plan leaked to the media. The unique nature of the proposal drew both support and criticism. Some argued that it was too expensive, others that it was too experimental. Conservation groups debated whether it would set a precedent for managing wild horses in ways that might compromise their freedom. Ghost, meanwhile, demonstrated why the effort was worthwhile. During a particularly challenging therapy session, he showed problem-solving abilities that amazed even his experienced caregivers. Faced with a complex obstacle course designed to test his recovery, He not only completed it, but seemed to improve upon the intended path, finding more efficient ways to navigate the challenges. This is exactly why the sanctuary concept can work, Carol insisted, showing videos of Ghost's performance to skeptical officials. He's not just surviving his injury, he's adapting, learning, and teaching us in the process. Imagine what we could learn about wild horse rehabilitation if we give him the chance to lead in this new way. As the sun set over the proposed sanctuary site, Mike stood with Ghost on a rise, overlooking the valley. The stallion's posture had changed in recent weeks. There was a new alertness, a sense of purpose that transcended his physical rehabilitation. His eyes scanned the landscape with the same intelligence that had kept his herd safe for so many years. But even as the sanctuary plans progressed, forces beyond their control were building. The mountain lion's territory was expanding, the drought was worsening, and Ghost's herd was moving closer to populated areas in search of water. The timeline for their ambitious project was no longer just about Ghost's recovery. It was becoming a race against nature itself. The drought tightened its grip on the Nevada landscape with merciless intensity. What had begun as a dry spell evolved into a crisis that threatened both wild and domestic animals across the region. As water sources dwindled, Ghost's former herd was forced to venture increasingly close to populated areas, leading to dangerous encounters with traffic and domestic livestock. At the rehabilitation facility, Ghost's behavior reflected the mounting tension. His calls became more frequent and urgent, often starting before dawn and continuing intermittently throughout the day. Dr. Martinez noticed changes in his vital signs, elevated heart rate, increased stress markers in his blood work, signs that he was responding physiologically to his herd's distress. "He knows they're in trouble," Mike observed during a particularly restless therapy session. "Every time we hear about the herd moving closer to the highways, he seems to sense it. His focus during rehabilitation is starting to suffer." The sanctuary project, meanwhile, faced its own challenges. The necessary permits were moving slowly through bureaucratic channels, while the drought accelerated the timeline of need. Sarah Martinez reported that the springs in Horseshoe Valley, though still flowing, were showing signs of strain. "We're losing our window of opportunity," Carol warned during an emergency meeting. "The herd needs safe access to water now, not after weeks of administrative reviews." The situation reached a critical point when two young colts from Ghost's herd were found exhausted and dehydrated near a busy interstate. The rescue operation was successful, but it highlighted the desperate situation. Without experienced leadership, the herd was making dangerous decisions in their search for resources. Ghost's reaction to the colt's rescue was profound. When the young horses were brought to a holding facility within earshot of the rehabilitation center, his behavior changed dramatically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The stallion, who had shown such patience throughout his recovery, became agitated, pushing against the limits of his strength during therapy sessions. Dr. Reynolds documented this change with growing concern. "His determination is admirable, but he's risking re-injury. The progress we've made could be compromised if he pushes too hard, too fast." The turning point came during what should have been a routine evening evaluation. Mike was checking Ghost's legs after a therapy session when distant thunder rolled across the sky. The promise of rain, so rare in recent months, charged the air with electricity. Ghost's reaction was immediate and unexpected. The stallion lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. His posture transformed, no longer a patient in rehabilitation, but a herd leader sensing an opportunity. Before anyone could react, Ghost gathered himself and made his first real attempt to run since his injury. "Ghost, wait!" Mike called, but it was too late. The stallion pushed off with surprising strength, breaking into a gallop that showed both power and the lingering effects of his injury. He managed several strides before his weakened hindquarters betrayed him, sending him stumbling. Mike reached him just as he caught his balance. Ghost stood trembling, his breath coming in heavy gasps, but his eyes were bright with a new intensity. The brief run had proved both his progress and his limitations. He could move with something close to his old speed, but the cost was clearly too high. Dr. Chen, who witnessed the incident, called an immediate team meeting. "We're at a crossroads," he announced. "Ghost is showing us he's ready to take a more active role, but his body isn't fully prepared. We need to make some difficult decisions." The team gathered around maps and medical charts, trying to balance Ghost's determination against the reality of his condition. The sanctuary plan offered a middle ground, but the timeline for its completion now seemed painfully slow against the urgency of the situation. As they debated options, a BLM ranger arrived with news that changed everything. The mountain lion, whose presence had been threatening the local herds, had been spotted near one of the last reliable water sources in the area. Ghost's herd, already struggling with the drought, was now facing a direct predatory threat. The sun set on a day of impossible choices. In the rehabilitation paddock, Ghost stood at attention, his ears focused on distant sounds only he could hear. The wind carried the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen, and somewhere in the darkness, his herd faced dangers he could no longer protect them from. Mike stayed late that night, watching Ghost's silhouette against the darkening sky. The bond between them had evolved beyond handler and patient. They were now partners facing a crisis that would test the limits of both trust and innovation. The decisions they would make in the coming days would challenge everything they thought they knew about wild horse rehabilitation and conservation. The solution came to Mike in the early hours of the morning, inspired by watching Ghost's behavior during his rehabilitation. While the sanctuary project would take too long to implement fully, perhaps they could create a temporary safe zone, a bridge between the present crisis and their long-term plans. "Ghost has been showing us the way all along," Mike explained. "To the emergency team meeting he called at dawn. He's adapted to every challenge we've given him, found ways to work within his limitations. What if we apply that same principle to helping his herd?" The plan was audacious. Using Ghost's recovered mobility, even with its limitations, they could establish a controlled reunion with his herd. Not in the wild, and not in full captivity, but in a carefully prepared section of Sarah Martinez's ranch that could serve as a temporary sanctuary. Dr. Chen raised immediate concerns. Ghost's recovery is still fragile. Any serious setback now could undo months of progress. He pulled up the latest medical charts, pointing to areas where the stallion's strength was still compromised. But Dr. Reynolds saw potential in the idea. "Look at how he's been managing the rehabilitation paddock," she argued. "He's learned to navigate obstacles, to compensate for his limitations. He's not just healing, he's adapting his leadership style." Carol White brought crucial insight from her years of observing Ghost in the wild. Even before his injury, he was known for his strategic thinking. He didn't lead his herd through brute strength. He led through intelligence, finding safe paths, avoiding unnecessary risks. The team worked through the night, developing a plan that would challenge conventional wildlife management approaches. They would use Ghost's natural leadership abilities while accounting for his physical limitations, creating a controlled environment where he could guide his herd to safety without endangering his recovery. Sarah Martinez's ranch offered the perfect staging ground. A series of connected pastures could be modified to create secure corridors, leading the herd away from the drought-stricken areas and the mountain lion's territory. The terrain was challenging enough to keep the horses engaged, but manageable enough for Ghost's current condition. We'll need to modify some of the rehabilitation equipment we've been using, Dr. Reynolds explained, sketching out adaptations to their support systems. Ghost may need backup support at crucial points, but we can design it to be minimally invasive. The most innovative aspect of the plan came from Mike's observations of Ghost's problem-solving abilities. They would set up a series of guided choice points, allowing Ghost to demonstrate safe routes to his herd, while having backup options if his strength failed. Dr. Martinez focused on the medical contingencies. We'll need mobile treatment stations at key points, she insisted, and a way to monitor Ghost's vital signs throughout the process. One serious overexertion could be catastrophic. As the team refined the details, Ghost seemed to sense the change in energy. His behavior in the rehabilitation paddock shifted. He began testing different paths through the obstacles, as if practicing for what was to come. His calls toward the distant hills took on a different tone, more measured and deliberate. The plan faced its first test when they introduced Ghost to the modified ranch layout. The stallion's response exceeded their expectations. He moved through the prepared corridors with careful precision, clearly gauging the demands of each section against his capabilities. "Look at how he's reading the terrain," Carol observed. "He's not just moving through it, he's analyzing it, planning. This is the intelligence that kept his herd safe all those years in the wild." But the most remarkable moment came when they brought the young mare from the holding facility to the ranch. Ghost's interaction with her demonstrated a level of leadership they hadn't anticipated. Instead of trying to impress her with displays of strength he couldn't safely manage, he guided her through the modified pathways, showing her the safest routes. "He's teaching," Mike realized, watching the interaction. "Just like he's been learning from us during rehabilitation, he's now passing that knowledge on. This could work." The team worked through another night, refining their preparations. They installed monitoring equipment at strategic points, established emergency protocols, and prepared for every contingency they could imagine. The drought wasn't letting up, and reports of the mountain lion moving closer to the herd added urgency to their timeline. As dawn broke over the ranch, Ghost stood at the highest point of the modified terrain, his stance reflecting both his old authority and his new adaptations. The wind carried the distant sounds of his herd, now being carefully guided toward the ranch boundaries by BLM rangers. Mike watched his friend face the rising sun, seeing in Ghost's posture the weight of what was to come. They were about to attempt something unprecedented, a fusion of wild instinct and learned adaptation that could change the future of wild horse rehabilitation. The next few hours would test not just Ghost's recovery, but the very nature of what it meant to be a wild horse in a changing world. Dawn broke over Sarah Martinez's ranch with an electric tension in the air. The BLM rangers had worked through the night, carefully guiding Ghost's herd toward the prepared sanctuary. Their radio updates painted a picture of exhausted horses, the drought, and constant threat of predators having taken their toll on the once proud band. Ghost sensed their approach before anyone else. His posture changed subtly at first, an alertness in his ears, a slight shift in his breathing. Then came his call, deep and resonant, carrying across the morning air. The answer that echoed back caused everyone present to freeze. His herd was responding. "Look at his body language," Carol whispered to Mike as they monitored from their observation point. "He's not showing any of the stress patterns we were worried about. He's completely focused on them." The first horses appeared on the ridge just as the sun cleared the horizon. The lead mare, a dun-colored veteran who had run with Ghost for years, emerged from the morning mist. Behind her, the rest of the herd moved like shadows, 3 other mares, 2 yearlings, and 4 foals. Their ribs showed clearly through their dull coats, telling the story of their desperate search for water. Ghost's reaction defied everyone's expectations. Instead of attempting to rush to his herd, potentially risking injury, he positioned himself strategically at the entrance to the prepared corridor. His posture conveyed both authority and invitation, a clear signal to his approaching family. Dr. Reynolds monitored his vital signs through the telemetry equipment they'd attached. "His heart rate is elevated but stable," she reported. "He's managing his energy. This is exactly what we hoped for." The lead mare paused at the ridge, testing the air. The herd bunched behind her, their exhaustion evident in their drooping heads and trembling legs. The mountain lion's pressure and lack of water had pushed them to their limits. Ghost called again, but this time the sound was different, softer, almost conversational. Those who had studied him in the wild recognized it as his gathering call, the one he had used to guide his herd through difficult terrain. "He's not trying to prove his dominance," Carol observed, her voice thick with emotion. "He's showing them the way to safety, just like he always did in the wild." The lead mare made her decision. She started down the slope toward the corridor, each step careful but deliberate. The rest of the herd followed, maintaining the formation that had helped them survive in the wild. As they drew closer, their reaction to seeing Ghost was profound. The younger horses quickened their pace, while the older mares maintained their cautious approach. Ghost waited until the lead mare was close enough to catch his scent. The moment of recognition between them was powerful. She remembered him, despite his changed appearance and the months of separation. Her tense posture relaxed slightly, and she took another step forward. What happened next demonstrated why. Ghost had been such a successful herd leader. Instead of waiting for the herd to come to him, he turned and moved deliberately into the corridor, showing them the path he had practiced during his preparation. His gait, though still showing signs of his injury, was confident and measured. The herd followed. First the lead mare, then the others, matching their pace to his. Ghost led them to the first water station, stepping aside to let them drink while he stood guard. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the same vigilance that had kept them safe in the wild, now adapted to their new environment. "He's compensating perfectly for his limitations," Dr. Reynolds noted, watching through binoculars. "See how he's positioning himself to keep watch while minimizing strain on his recovering muscles? He's applying everything he learned in rehabilitation." The younger horses, once they had drunk their fill, began to show signs of their old energy. One of the yearlings pranced sideways, tossing his head. Ghost's response was immediate, but measured, a soft nickering that seemed to calm the youngster without requiring physical intervention. Mike watched the interaction with growing amazement. The Ghost they were seeing now was neither the wild stallion of the past, nor simply a rehabilitated horse. He had become something new, a leader who had learned to combine his natural instincts with acquired wisdom. As the morning progressed, Ghost guided his herd through the prepared sanctuary, showing them the safe paths, the sheltered resting areas, the multiple water sources. His movements were deliberate and educational, demonstrating to the younger horses how to navigate the new terrain while conserving energy. But even in this moment of triumph, the team couldn't relax completely. The mountain lion was still out there, and the drought continued to worsen. They had won a crucial battle, but the larger challenges remained. As Ghost settled his herd into their temporary sanctuary, the question hung in the air. Could this unprecedented experiment become a lasting solution? The first week after the herd's arrival revealed both the promise and challenges of their unprecedented arrangement. Ghost's leadership style continued to evolve, blending his wild instincts with the adaptations he'd learned during rehabilitation. The change was most evident in how he managed the younger horse's energy. Instead of the traditional method of running with the yearlings to burn off their excess spirit, Ghost developed a sophisticated system of guided play within the sanctuary's safe zones. He would position himself at strategic points, using his calls and presence to direct their movement patterns, teaching them boundaries without physically enforcing them. He's essentially creating a natural gymnasium, Dr. Reynolds observed, documenting the behavior. Look at how he's using the terrain features we installed for his rehabilitation. He's teaching the young ones the same careful movement patterns he learned during his recovery. The lead mare, whom they had named Sierra, proved to be an invaluable partner in this new arrangement. She seemed to understand Ghost's physical limitations and adapted her own role accordingly, taking on more of the active herding duties while following his guidance on direction and timing. But not everything went smoothly. The third night brought their first major test when the mountain lion's screams echoed across the sanctuary. The herd's reaction was instant. The foals bunched together, the mares formed a protective circle, and the yearlings danced nervously in place. All eyes turned to Ghost. Mike, who was on night watch, witnessed what happened next. "It was incredible," he reported later. Instead of trying to chase the mountain lion away himself, which he couldn't safely do anymore, Ghost organized the herd's movement differently. He positioned the strongest mares on the perimeter and guided the whole group to the most defensible part of the sanctuary. The strategy worked. The mountain lion, faced with a well-organized herd in a protected position, eventually moved on. But the incident highlighted the ongoing challenges they faced. Ghost's adapted leadership style was effective, but required constant refinement. Dr. Chen's medical evaluations during this period showed mixed results. While Ghost's overall condition remained stable, the demands of herd leadership took their toll. His stress markers are elevated, the doctor reported during a team meeting. He's pushing the limits of his recovery, trying to balance his natural instincts with his new limitations. The situation grew more complex when 3 of the mares showed signs of pregnancy. The upcoming births would test not only Ghost's leadership, but the entire sanctuary concept. Traditional wild horse bands moved constantly, seeking the best conditions for foaling. Here, they would need to create those conditions within their limited space. Ghost seemed to anticipate this challenge. He began spending more time with the pregnant mares, guiding them to explore specific areas of the sanctuary that the team hadn't even recognized as potential birthing sites. His behavior sparked new insights into wild horse intelligence and adaptation. He's not just leading anymore, Carol noted, reviewing footage of these interactions. He's teaching his herd how to thrive in this new environment, just as he had to learn during his own rehabilitation. The sanctuary itself continued to evolve. Sarah Martinez worked with the team to modify features based on their observations of the herd's behavior. They added more sheltered areas, adjusted water access points, and created new enrichment zones that challenged the horses while respecting their wild nature. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the effect Ghost's adapted leadership had on the younger horses. The yearlings, who would typically be approaching the age of separation from the herd, showed unusually mature behavior. They mimicked Ghost's careful movement patterns, learned his new communication signals, and began showing signs of the same thoughtful approach to challenges. "We're witnessing the evolution of wild horse behavior," Carol explained to visiting wildlife officials. "Ghost isn't just adapting himself. He's passing on these adaptations to the next generation. This could revolutionize how we think about wildlife rehabilitation and conservation." Yet, amid these successes, concerns remained. The drought continued to worsen, putting pressure on the sanctuary's resources. Other wild horse bands in the region were struggling, and there were discussions about whether the sanctuary concept could be expanded. The mountain lion remained a threat, growing more desperate as its natural prey became scarcer. As the sun set on another challenging day, Mike found Ghost standing at his favorite observation point, surveying his herd with watchful eyes. The stallion's body showed the signs of his injury and ongoing limitations, but his presence carried a new kind of strength, the power of adaptation, intelligence, and unwavering determination to protect his family. The next phase of their journey would test not just Ghost's adapted leadership, but the very concept of what it meant to be wild in a changing world. The success or failure of their experiment could reshape the future of wild horse conservation, marking the beginning of a new approach to balancing freedom with survival. The first birth came during a storm-laden night. Ghost's behavior had alerted the team hours before any visible signs from the mare. He had been increasingly attentive to Shadow, the youngest of the pregnant mares, guiding her to one of the sheltered areas he had previously identified. His medical training is influencing his natural instincts, Dr. Martinez observed, watching through night vision equipment as Ghost positioned himself between the laboring mare and the rest of the herd. He's creating the same calm environment we maintained during his rehabilitation. The birth itself proved more challenging than anticipated. Shadow was young and inexperienced, and the foal was positioned awkwardly. In the wild, such complications often led to tragedy, but here, in their unique sanctuary, something remarkable occurred. Ghost's behavior shifted the moment he sensed trouble. His calls changed from quiet reassurance to sharp, distinctive alerts that the team had learned to recognize during his rehabilitation. He was deliberately summoning help, something wild horses rarely did. Dr. Martinez responded immediately, approaching with careful respect for the herd's dynamics. What happened next astonished even the most experienced members of the team. Instead of becoming protective or aggressive, Ghost facilitated the veterinarian's approach, using his presence to keep Shadow calm, while maintaining enough distance to allow medical intervention. He's acting as a bridge between our world and theirs, Mike noted, watching the careful choreography unfold. This goes beyond learned behavior. He's actively choosing to integrate his wild instincts with his sanctuary experience. Thanks to this unprecedented cooperation, Dr. Martinez was able to assist with the birth. The foal, a sturdy colt with his mother's dark coloring, arrived safely. But the night's challenges weren't over. The storm that had been threatening finally broke, bringing not the gentle rain they desperately needed, but violent winds and lightning that threatened the sanctuary's infrastructure. Ghost's response to this new crisis demonstrated the full extent of his adapted leadership. He organized the herd with remarkable efficiency, positioning the stronger horses to shield the newborn and weaker members. His strategy incorporated both natural instinct and learned awareness of the sanctuary's safe zones. However, the storm brought an unexpected threat. The high winds damaged several sections of the sanctuary's fencing, and reports came in of other wild horse bands being driven into the area by the weather. The potential for territorial conflicts loomed, threatening the delicate balance they had achieved. The situation grew more complex when one of these displaced bands appeared at the sanctuary's compromised boundary. Their stallion was young and aggressive, seeing the protected water sources as an opportunity. Ghost's response would test everything he had learned about adapted leadership. In the wild, such confrontations typically led to violent battles between stallions. Ghost, with his physical limitations, couldn't risk such an encounter. Instead, he demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that left observers in awe. Rather than meeting the challenge head-on, Ghost organized his herd in a way that demonstrated both their unity and the futility of conflict. He positioned his most experienced mares in a coordinated formation, while keeping the younger horses and new foal protected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His posture and calls communicated not aggression, but a calm authority that seemed to give the rival stallion pause. He's using psychological deterrence, Carroll explained to the team watching anxiously. Instead of fighting for dominance, he's showing that his leadership is based on something more sophisticated than physical strength. The standoff lasted several tense minutes before the rival band's stallion backed down, leading his herd away from the sanctuary. But the incident highlighted the growing pressures on their experiment. The drought was forcing more horses into their area, and Ghost's adapted leadership style would face increasing challenges. As dawn broke, revealing the storm's impact on the sanctuary, the team faced difficult decisions. The damaged fencing needed repairs, but more importantly, they needed to re-evaluate their strategies for handling increased contact with other wild horses. Ghost, meanwhile, returned his attention to Shadow and her newborn colt, demonstrating the dual nature of his leadership. He was at once a protector of his herd's safety and a nurturing presence for its newest member. The colt's first wobbly steps under Ghost's watchful eye symbolized both the fragility and resilience of their unprecedented situation. Mike, observing this interaction, recognized that they had reached another crucial turning point. Ghost's success in handling both the birth crisis and the territorial challenge proved the value of their experiment, but it also raised new questions about the future of wild horse conservation. The sanctuary had become more than just a safe haven for one rehabilitated stallion and his herd. It was evolving into a model for a new kind of relationship between wild and domestic spaces, between natural instincts and learned adaptations. The question now was whether this model could survive the mounting pressures from both nature and human encroachment. News of Ghost's successful leadership and the sanctuary's innovative approach spread through the conservation community like wildfire. Wildlife experts and land management officials from across the country began arriving at Sarah Martinez's ranch, eager to witness firsthand the unprecedented integration of wild horse behavior with controlled rehabilitation. The attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Dr. Chen found himself fielding constant requests for data on Ghost's recovery process, while Carol White's documentation of the herd's adapted behaviors became the subject of intense scientific interest. The sanctuary was evolving from an emergency solution into a potential model for future conservation efforts. What we're seeing here challenges everything we thought we knew about wild horse rehabilitation, explained Dr. James Wilson, a visiting expert in wildlife conservation. Ghost isn't just surviving with his limitations, he's creating new paradigms of herd leadership that could revolutionize how we manage injured wild animals. However, Ghost himself seemed unaware of his growing fame. His focus remained entirely on his herd, particularly as the remaining pregnant mares approached their due dates. His attention to their needs demonstrated an even more sophisticated understanding of the sanctuary's resources than the team had anticipated. Watch how he's rotating the herd through different areas, Mike pointed out to a group of observers. He's not just leading them to water and shelter, he's actively managing the grazing patterns to protect the vegetation. He's thinking long-term. This resource management behavior caught the attention of BLM officials struggling with wild horse population issues across the region. Ghost's natural intelligence, combined with his rehabilitation experience, had created a unique approach to herd sustainability that offered potential solutions for wider conservation challenges. But success brought its own complications. As more pregnant mares from other bands were discovered struggling in the drought, pressure mounted to expand the sanctuary's capacity. The team faced difficult questions about the balance between helping more horses and maintaining the delicate ecosystem they had established. Ghost's response to these pressures revealed yet another layer of his adapted intelligence. When two exhausted pregnant mares were cautiously introduced to the sanctuary's outer section, his behavior surprised everyone. Instead of displaying typical stallion territoriality, He organized his herd to create a buffer zone, allowing the new arrivals to benefit from the sanctuary's resources without disrupting his band's stability. He's essentially creating a diplomatic solution, Carroll observed, documenting the interaction. This goes beyond normal wild horse behavior. He's applying the cooperative principles he learned during his rehabilitation to herd management. The sanctuary's success also attracted attention from less welcome quarters. As the drought worsened, local ranchers began pressuring for access to the protected water sources. Ghost's herd had grown with the new foals, and resource management became increasingly critical. Sarah Martinez found herself defending the sanctuary concept to her neighbors. "What we're learning here could help all of us," she argued during a tense community meeting. Ghost's adapted leadership style is showing us how to manage resources more effectively in harsh conditions. The pressure peaked when a severe dust storm swept through the region, driving several displaced wild horse bands toward the sanctuary. Ghost's response to this crisis demonstrated the full evolution of his leadership. He organized his herd to share resources with the desperate newcomers while maintaining clear boundaries and order. Dr. Reynolds, monitoring Ghost's physical condition during this period, noted something remarkable. "His stress levels are actually lower than we'd expect," she reported. "It's as if the complexity of the challenges is engaging his intelligence in ways that reduce the physical strain of leadership." The dust storm crisis became a turning point in the sanctuary's development. Wildlife officials, witnessing Ghost's management of the situation, began serious discussions about expanding the model to other locations. The combination of natural horse behavior with learned adaptation strategies offered a new approach to wildlife conservation in increasingly challenging environments. Mike, watching Ghost guide his expanded herd through the crisis, reflected on how far they'd come from that first desperate rescue in the desert. The injured stallion they had found had not only recovered, but had become a pioneer of a new way forward in wild horse conservation. As the dust storm subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape and new challenges, the team realized they had crossed a threshold. The sanctuary was no longer just an experiment in rehabilitation. It had become a living laboratory for the future of wildlife conservation, with Ghost as its unexpected teacher. But even as they celebrated these successes, nature reminded them of its unpredictable power. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon signaled an approaching storm that would test everything they had built and learned, forcing Ghost and his human partners to face their greatest challenge yet. The storm that approached the sanctuary was unlike anything the region had seen in decades. Weather reports warned of a rare meteorological phenomenon, a stalled system that would dump months' worth of rain in a matter of days. After so much drought, the parched earth wouldn't be able to absorb such a deluge. Ghost sensed the danger before the first drops fell. His behavior shifted dramatically, catching the attention of both his herd and the sanctuary team. The stallion began methodically guiding small groups of horses to the highest points of the sanctuary, focusing particularly on the mothers with young foals. "He's preparing them," Mike realized, watching Ghost's systematic approach. He remembers the terrain from his rehabilitation exercises. He knows which areas are most stable. Dr. Chen called an emergency meeting as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. "We're looking at potential flash flooding in the lower sections of the sanctuary," he warned, pointing to topographical maps. "The ground is too hard from the drought to absorb this much water quickly." But even as the team rushed to implement emergency protocols, Ghost was already executing his own evacuation plan. He had divided his herd into manageable groups, stationing the most experienced mares with the younger horses, and systematically moving them to safer ground. The storm struck with devastating force. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook. the ground with such intensity that several of the younger horses panicked. In the wild, such panic could have led to disaster, but Ghost's adapted leadership style proved its worth in the crisis. Instead of trying to control the frightened horses through dominance, he positioned himself as a calm center point, using the techniques he had learned during his own rehabilitation. His steady presence and deliberate movements created a pattern that the panicked horses could focus on and follow. "Look at how he's applying his therapy training," Dr. Reynolds observed through rain-blurred binoculars. "He's using the same gradual elevation changes we taught him during recovery, but he's adapted it for the entire herd." The night brought even greater challenges. A flash flood tore through the lower sections of the sanctuary, threatening to cut off access to their emergency medical supplies. The team watched in amazement as Ghost led a coordinated movement of his herd that not only kept them safe, but also created paths that the sanctuary staff could use to reach critical areas. Sarah Martinez, who had seen many storms in her years, ranching, shook her head in wonder. "He's not just reacting to the crisis," she said. "He's anticipating each new challenge." Those hours spent learning to navigate the rehabilitation courses gave him an understanding of terrain management that most wild horses never develop. The storm's intensity peaked near midnight. The sound of rushing water filled the darkness, punctuated by the crash of thunder and the occasional frightened cry of a horse. Through it all, Ghost maintained his position at a crucial intersection of high ground, directing traffic like a veteran crossing guard as different groups of horses needed to move to safer positions. Then came the moment everyone had feared. A massive lightning strike hit an old tree near one of the sanctuary's boundaries, sending it crashing down through the fencing. The gap created a dangerous opportunity for panic-driven horses to bolt into dangerous territory. Ghost's response showcased everything he had learned about integrated leadership. He quickly positioned his most trusted mares to secure the gap, then began a series of calls that the team had never heard before, a combination of his wild vocalizations and the communication patterns he had developed during rehabilitation. "He's created his own language," Carol realized, recording the sounds. "It's a hybrid of wild horse calls and learned signals. The herd understands exactly what he wants them to do." The effectiveness of this communication became clear as the herd reorganized itself with remarkable precision. Even the youngest foals followed the instructions, staying with their assigned groups and moving to designated safe areas. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken, revealing the extent of its impact. Parts of the sanctuary had been transformed by the flooding, but thanks to Ghost's leadership, not a single horse had been lost or seriously injured. More importantly, his strategic use of the terrain had protected critical infrastructure and resources. The morning light revealed something else. Ghost standing at his favorite observation point, tired but vigilant, overlooking a herd that had not just survived, but had demonstrated a new level of cooperative behavior under crisis conditions. His adapted leadership style had created something unprecedented, a wild horse band that could face natural disasters with almost military precision while maintaining their essential wild nature. Mike, making his way through the mud to check on his friend, saw in Ghost's stance the full meaning of their long journey together. The injured stallion they had rescued had become more than just a success story in rehabilitation. He had evolved into a pioneer of a new way for wild horses to adapt to a changing world. But as the sun rose higher, new challenges emerged on the horizon. The storm's impact extended far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries, and Ghost's unprecedented success was about to face its greatest test yet. The storm's aftermath transformed the landscape far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. Flash floods had carved new channels through the desert, altering traditional wild horse territories and migration routes. As reports filtered in from across the region, it became clear that Ghost's sanctuary had become an unexpected island of stability in a chaos of displacement. "We're getting calls from every direction," Carol informed the team during an emergency. "Assessment meeting. Multiple herds have been forced out of their usual ranges. The BLM is overwhelmed, trying to track and manage the situation." But it was Dr. Chen's news that caught everyone's attention. His latest evaluation of Ghost showed something remarkable. The crisis had actually accelerated his rehabilitation in unexpected ways. The complex movements required during the storm evacuation had strengthened muscle groups that therapy alone hadn't fully reached. "He's adapting faster than we ever anticipated," Dr. Chen explained, sharing his findings. "The combination of leadership responsibilities and crisis management has created a kind of natural physical therapy we couldn't have designed." Ghost's response to the post-storm challenges demonstrated this progress. He began making longer observation runs along the sanctuary's boundaries, his movement showing new strength and confidence. More importantly, he started actively working with the sanctuary team during their repair efforts. "Watch how he's directing his herd to avoid areas where we're working," Mike pointed out to visiting BLM officials. "He's not just leading them, he's actively coordinating with our reconstruction efforts." This cooperation caught the attention of wildlife management experts struggling with the regional crisis. Traditional methods of handling displaced wild horses often led to confrontation and stress. Ghost's sanctuary offered a different model, one where wild horses could adapt to controlled environments while maintaining their essential nature. The opportunity to expand their approach came sooner than expected. A large band of displaced horses, including several injured during the flooding, was discovered less than 10 miles from the sanctuary. Their situation was deteriorating rapidly, but traditional rescue methods would likely do more harm than good. Sarah Martinez was the first to suggest the unprecedented, "What if we let Ghost teach us how to help them?" The proposal was radical. Instead of trying to capture and rehabilitate the injured horses using conventional methods, they would apply the principles they had learned from Ghost's journey. But success would require something that had never been attempted, asking a rehabilitated wild stallion to actively participate in the rescue of other horses. The team spent a tense day observing Ghost's reaction as they set up a controlled approach corridor similar to the one used during his own rehabilitation. His response exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Not only did he seem to understand what they were attempting, but he began adjusting their setup based on his own experience. "Look at how he's testing the footing," Dr. Reynolds observed. "He remembers which surfaces worked best during his recovery. He's showing us how to make it safer for injured horses." The rescue operation began at dawn. Using a combination of traditional herding techniques and Ghost's natural leadership presence, they carefully guided the displaced band toward the sanctuary's new rehabilitation zone. The injured horses, rather than panicking at human presence, responded to Ghost's calm authority. What followed was a masterclass in adaptive leadership. Ghost seamlessly integrated the newcomers into the sanctuary's routine, using his experienced mares to demonstrate safe movement patterns and resource management. His methods were so effective that the wildlife management team began documenting every detail for future implementation elsewhere. "He's not just showing us how to rehabilitate injured wild horses," Carol explained to amazed observers. "He's creating a whole new protocol for wild horse crisis management. This could revolutionize how we handle natural disasters in wild populations." But perhaps the most remarkable development came from the younger horses, the foals born in the sanctuary, who had grown up watching Ghost's adapted leadership style, began mimicking his methods with the newcomers. They were becoming ambassadors of this new approach to wild horse behavior. As the sun set on another successful integration, Mike found Ghost at his observation point, overlooking the expanded herd. The stallion's posture reflected both his restored strength and his evolved understanding of leadership. He had become more than just a rehabilitated wild horse. He was now a bridge between two worlds, showing both humans and horses a new way forward. The sanctuary's success sparked intense interest from conservation organizations worldwide. Requests poured in from other regions facing similar challenges with wild horse populations. Ghost's journey from injured stallion to pioneering leader was becoming a blueprint for a new approach to wildlife rehabilitation and conservation. Yet even as they celebrated these achievements, the team recognized that they were still writing the first chapters of a much larger story. The principles they had discovered would need to be tested and adapted for different situations and species. But Ghost had shown them something invaluable, that with patience, understanding and respect for wild nature, seemingly impossible bridges could be built. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As autumn approached, the sanctuary's influence spread far beyond its physical boundaries. Wildlife management teams from 3 neighboring states had begun implementing variations of what they now called the Ghost Protocol, a revolutionary approach to wild horse rehabilitation that balanced natural behaviors with controlled support systems. Dr. Reynolds found herself conducting training sessions for veterinary teams, eager to learn the nuanced physical therapy techniques that had emerged from Ghost's recovery. The key insight, she explained to a group of specialists, is that we're not just treating injuries, we're helping wild animals adapt their natural behaviors to new limitations. But it was Ghost himself who continued to provide the most surprising developments. His latest innovation emerged during the integration of a particularly challenging new arrival, a young stallion with an injured leg who initially resisted all attempts at treatment. Instead of avoiding the difficult newcomer, Ghost approached the rehabilitation process with remarkable sophistication. He began demonstrating his own therapy exercises, showing rather than forcing, creating a pattern that the injured horse could choose to follow. He's basically become a peer counselor, Mike observed, watching the interaction. He remembers his own rehabilitation journey, and he's sharing that experience. This goes beyond anything we expected from wild horse behavior. The success of these peer-to-peer rehabilitation techniques caught the attention of wildlife behaviorists worldwide. Ghost had essentially created a new model of animal rehabilitation where previously injured animals could help guide others through the recovery process. However, this period of triumph was interrupted by an unexpected discovery. During a routine health check of the sanctuary's water sources, tests revealed concerning levels of mineral contamination. The drought had concentrated naturally occurring substances to potentially dangerous levels. Dr. Chen called an emergency meeting to share the results. "We're looking at a slow-building crisis," he explained. "The contamination isn't immediately dangerous, but long-term exposure could create serious health issues for the horses." The situation became more complex when they realized the contamination likely extended to natural water sources throughout the region. Ghost Sanctuary had inadvertently become a crucial testing ground for handling a widespread environmental challenge. Ghost's response to this invisible threat demonstrated just how far he had come. When the team began setting up new water stations with filtered supplies, he quickly recognized their importance. More remarkably, he developed a system for rotating the herd's water usage, seemingly understanding the need to manage this resource differently. His ability to adapt to new information is extraordinary, Carroll noted, documenting these behavioral changes. He's not just following patterns anymore. He's actively participating in problem solving. The sanctuary team worked around the clock to implement water management solutions, but the situation highlighted a larger issue. The success of their rehabilitation model had created its own challenges. More horses meant more resource pressure, and Ghost's leadership abilities were being tested in increasingly complex ways. Then came the development that would challenge everything they had built. A group of wild horse advocates, impressed by Ghost's story but concerned about the increasingly managed nature of the sanctuary, began pushing for his release back into the wild. Their argument was emotionally compelling. Despite his injuries, Ghost had proven himself more capable than anyone expected. Didn't he deserve the chance to return to true freedom? The debate touched on fundamental questions about wildlife rehabilitation and conservation. What did freedom really mean for an animal that had learned to bridge the wild and managed worlds? Was Ghost's new role as a rehabilitation leader actually more valuable than his previous life of pure wilderness? Mike found Ghost at his observation point as these discussions intensified. The stallion's gaze swept over his expanded herd, a mix of original band members, rehabilitated newcomers, and youngsters born in the sanctuary. His posture showed both his restored strength and his acquired wisdom. The morning light revealed subtle changes in Ghost that few would have noticed months ago. His movements combined the natural grace of a wild horse with the careful precision learned through rehabilitation. He had become something unique, neither fully wild nor domesticated, but rather a pioneer of a new way of existing in a changing world. As the sanctuary team grappled with questions about Ghost's future, nature prepared to add its own perspective to the debate. Weather satellites had detected a new pattern developing over the Pacific, one that promised to test everything they had learned about adaptation and survival. The weather system that developed in the Pacific brought not rain this time, but an unprecedented early winter storm. As temperatures plummeted and snow clouds gathered, Ghost's sanctuary faced its ultimate test, one that would finally resolve the question of his future. The storm's approach set off a chain of reactions throughout the wild horse territories. Unprepared for early winter conditions, multiple bands began moving desperately toward lower elevations, creating a crisis of displacement even larger than the one following the flood. Ghost sensed the changing pressure long before the first snowflakes fell. His behavior shifted into a new phase of leadership that combined everything he had learned. Using his understanding of the sanctuary's resources, he began preparing his expanded herd for the challenging conditions ahead. "Look at how methodically he's approaching this," Dr. Reynolds observed, watching Ghost guide small groups through winter preparation routines. He's teaching them to shelter in the protected areas, showing them where to find food that will be accessible under snow. He's creating a survival strategy that combines wild instincts with sanctuary resources. The storm struck with devastating force, dumping 3 feet of snow in less than 2 days. As temperatures dropped to record lows, the sanctuary became an island of hope in a desperate situation. Reports arrived of wild horses struggling in the deep snow, cut off from their usual winter grounds by the storm's unusual pattern. The debate about Ghost's future transformed overnight. The advocates for his release fell silent as they watched him coordinate an emergency response that no purely wild horse could have managed. Ghost had created something entirely new, a hybrid system of survival that married the best of wild wisdom with adapted innovation. "He's not just surviving in this environment," Carol explained to the assembled wildlife officials. "He's teaching other horses how to thrive in changing conditions. This is the future of wildlife conservation, building bridges between natural behaviors and necessary adaptations." The sanctuary's greatest moment came 3 days into the storm. A band of exhausted horses, driven down from the high country by the brutal conditions, approached the sanctuary's boundaries. In the wild, this would typically lead to aggressive territorial defense. Ghost's response demonstrated just how far they'd all come. Instead of defending his territory, Ghost organized his herd to create supervised access to the sanctuary's resources. He had essentially developed a refugee program for wild horses, complete with established protocols for integration and resource sharing. "This goes beyond anything we could have trained," Mike said, watching Ghost coordinate the emergency response. "He's not just applying what he learned in rehabilitation. He's innovating, creating solutions we never imagined." Dr. Chen's medical evaluations during this period revealed something remarkable. Despite the increased physical demands, Ghost's health was actually improving. The complex challenges of managing the crisis were engaging both his body and mind in ways that enhanced his recovery. "We've been asking the wrong question," Dr. Chen announced during an emergency assessment meeting. "The choice isn't between captivity and freedom. Ghost has created a third option, a new model of adaptive wildlife management where animals can maintain their essential wild nature while learning to cope with a changing world." The storm's intensity finally began, to ease after a week, leaving behind a transformed landscape and a transformed understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. Ghost's sanctuary had not only survived, but had demonstrated the vital importance of building bridges between wild and managed environments. As the sun broke through the clouds, Ghost stood at his observation point, surveying the expanded community he had helped create. Below him, horses from multiple bands moved with surprising harmony through the sanctuary's snow-covered spaces, sharing resources and shelter in ways that challenged traditional understanding of wild horse behavior. Mike joined him on the ridge, marveling at how far they'd come from that desperate rescue in the desert. Ghost acknowledged his presence with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark, his eyes scanning the territory he now guided with such wisdom. The question of Ghost's future had been answered not by human debate, but by Ghost himself. He had chosen a different kind of freedom, not the solitary independence of his previous life, but the deeper liberty of building something new, something that could help both horses and humans adapt to a changing world. As winter settled over the sanctuary, Ghost's story became more than just a tale of rehabilitation. It became a blueprint for the future of wildlife conservation, proving that with patience, understanding, and respect for wild wisdom, we could build bridges between the world we've created and the natural world we hope to preserve. The sun set on the snow-covered sanctuary, casting long shadows across the territory Ghost had helped transform. In the distance, his calls echoed across the valley, not the defiant cries of a wild stallion, but the confident guidance of a leader who had learned to combine the best of both worlds, showing a way forward for all those who would follow. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.